On the evening of February 4, 2010, Fallbrook, California. A family of 4, gone. Their car abandoned at the Mexican border. 5 days later, a dead man called his accountant. By the end of this story, you'll know exactly how one phone number exposed a killer who thought he'd erased everything. 9 days had passed since anyone heard from them. On February 13th, a man climbs through an open window at the back of a house on Avocado Vista Lane in Fallbrook, a quiet community in northern San Diego County known as the Friendly Village. His name is Michael McStay. He is looking for his brother. The house belongs to Joseph McStay, 40 years old, his wife Summer, 43, and their 2 sons, Gianni, 4, and Joseph Jr., 3. The McStays had moved to Fallbrook just 4 months earlier. Joseph owned and operated Earth-Inspired Products, a company that built high-end decorative water fountains for clients as far away as Saudi Arabia. Summer was a licensed real estate agent. By every measure, they were a family building something. Michael has been calling for days. No one picks up, no one calls back. Inside, the house is still. 2 bowls of popcorn sit on the couch, half-eaten, child-sized bowls. A carton of eggs has been left on the kitchen counter, days old. In the master bedroom closet, several suitcases lie open with folded clothing inside. More clothing is tossed across the floor. Summer's prescription sunglasses are still in the house. Her camera sits on the table. In an upstairs bedroom, a lamp lies on the floor. On a desk near the living room, a computer screen is dark. No one has touched it in days. There are no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass, no forced entry. Just silence, and 2 dogs in the backyard that haven't been fed. Before Michael arrived, he had already been to the house once, 2 days earlier. He had seen the dogs outside, their bowls empty. He moved the bowls to a different spot in the yard, a test. If someone was coming to feed them, the bowls would be moved back. When he returned the next day, the dogs had been fed. He left a note for whoever was caring for them, asking them to contact him. That evening, animal control called. They told Michael they had been visiting the home daily and feeding the dogs themselves. They didn't know the McStays. They had simply assumed the family would return. But no one had. Whatever happened inside this house, it left almost nothing behind. But there was one more thing Michael noticed that first day. Something that didn't make sense until much later. The neighbor's security camera. Jennifer Mitchley lived 2 doors up and across the street from the McStays. Her surveillance system ran continuously, recording a narrow strip of the road in front of her house. On the evening of February 4th, at 7:47 p.m., the camera captured the bottom 18 inches of a vehicle, just the tires and the lower body panel, as it passed through the frame. The vehicle appeared to turn into the McStay driveway. No license plate was visible, no occupants could be seen, just the underside of a car, moving through the dark, heading toward a house where a family was spending what appeared to be a normal Thursday evening. At 8:28 p.m., 41 minutes later, a call was placed from Joseph McStay's cell phone. It was the last call ever made from that number. The phone pinged a tower in Fallbrook. Then it went silent, permanently. Investigators would not examine this footage closely for years. When they finally did, what they found, and what they couldn't confirm, would become one of the most debated pieces of evidence in the entire case. 2 days after Michael climbed through that window, he phoned the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. Officers arrived and filed a missing persons report on February 15th. On February 19th, detectives executed a search warrant on the home. They confirmed what Michael had already seen. No evidence of foul play, no indication of violence, but clear signs of a hasty departure. The eggs, the popcorn, the clothing scattered in the bedroom. It looked like a family that left in a hurry. But left for where? The first answer came from a parking lot. On February 8th, 4 days after the family was last heard from, their white 1996 Isuzu Trooper had been towed from a strip mall in San Ysidro, less than half a mile from the U.S.-Mexico border. Security guards estimated the car had been parked there sometime between 5:30 and 7 that evening. The keys were inside. So was Summer's purse. So was her phone. The car seats for both boys were still strapped in the back. Where the car had been between February 4th and February 8th, no one knew. Then came the video. On March 5th, deputies released surveillance footage from a camera at the pedestrian border crossing into Mexico. The footage, time-stamped around 7 p.m. on February 8th, showed what appeared to be a family of 4, 2 adults and 2 small children, walking hand in hand through the gate into Tijuana. The San Diego Sheriff's Department made an announcement. Based on the video and computer searches found on the family's home computer, queries about traveling to Mexico with children, requirements for children's passports, and Spanish language lessons, investigators concluded that the McStay family had left the country voluntarily. Before we get to what happened next, if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe, because what came next changed everything. Flyers were distributed. Interpol was notified on February 23rd. The FBI joined the search in April 2010, focusing resources south of the border. Unconfirmed sightings trickled in from Mexico. A family matching their description spotted at a restaurant, at a bus station, in a small coastal town. None were ever verified. For months, the theory held. A family walked away from their lives. It happens. People disappear because they want to. But the people who knew the McStays didn't believe it. Joseph's family said he and Summer avoided Mexico entirely because of the drug violence along the border. Summer's sister pointed out that Summer's passport had expired. And then there was the money. Joseph had more than $100,000 sitting in his bank accounts. Not a single dollar had been withdrawn before the disappearance. Not a single transaction appeared after it. If they had planned a trip, they hadn't taken any money with them. If they had crossed into Mexico, they had done so without valid documents, without cash, and without telling a single person. Joseph's family looked at the border video again. The man in the footage appeared too tall and too thin to be Joseph. The children's heights didn't seem right either. They were never convinced. But officially, the case was closed, or as good as closed. The San Diego Sheriff's Department maintained its position through 2013. The McStays went to Mexico. End of story. Think about what investigators had at this point. A house with no signs of violence. A car abandoned at the border with everything still inside. A video that might not even show the right family. And $100,000 sitting untouched in a bank account. Does that look like a family that planned to leave? Joseph's father, Patrick McStay, refused to accept it. While the official investigation stalled, Patrick spent months, then years, combing through his son's business emails, looking for anything out of place. In late 2010, he flagged suspicious financial activity connected to a business associate. He brought it to detectives. They looked into it. It led nowhere. But Patrick didn't stop. He kept searching, kept calling, kept pushing anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, the case attracted a different kind of attention. A radio host named Rick Baker wrote a book about the disappearance, speculating that Summer might have been responsible. He traveled to Mexico, Belize, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic chasing leads. Amateur sleuths debated theories in online forums. Everyone had an answer. None of them were right. The investigation had effectively split into 2 camps. On one side, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department, the agency that had handled the initial missing persons case, stood by its conclusion. The McStays had crossed into Mexico. The video showed them. The computer searches supported it. There was no evidence of a crime. On the other side, the family. Michael McStay had walked through that house. He had seen the eggs, the popcorn, the dogs left behind. He had asked the detectives a question that would haunt the case for years. If his brother had voluntarily left the country, why was Summer's camera still sitting on the table? Why were her prescription sunglasses still in the house? Why would a mother of 2 toddlers leave without packing a single bag for her children? The detectives didn't have an answer. They also didn't change their position. The case was not officially closed, but it was not being actively worked. No detective was assigned to it full-time. No new leads were being pursued. For the McStay family, it felt like screaming into a void. Patrick kept writing emails to investigators. Michael kept calling. Joseph's mother, Susan Blake, gave interviews to anyone who would listen, insisting that her son would never have left without telling his family. The silence from official channels was deafening. And then, on a dirt road in the desert, a motorcyclist stopped his bike. 6 months passed, then a year, then 2, then 3. The McStays became one of those cases people talked about but no one could solve. An unsolved disappearance with no body, no crime scene, and no suspect. On November 11, 2013, 3 years and 9 months after the McStays vanished, a motorcyclist riding through the Mojave Desert near Victorville, California, roughly 100 miles north of the McStay home, spotted something in a wash off a rarely traveled dirt road. Human bones, partially exposed by erosion. Forensic investigators arrived and worked through the day and into the night. They uncovered 2 shallow graves. Inside those graves were 4 sets of human remains. Buried alongside them, in the same earth, was a 3-pound sledgehammer. 4 days later, the San Bernardino County Sheriff confirmed what the McStay family had feared for nearly 4 years. Dental records identified 2 of the remains as Joseph and Summer McStay. DNA confirmed the other 2 as Gianni and Joseph Jr. The cause of death for all 4 was blunt force trauma. Summer's skull had been fractured. One of the boys had been struck 7 times in the head. Investigators said they believed the victims had been tortured before they were killed. The McStays had never gone to Mexico. They had never left Fallbrook alive. Now investigators had a crime scene, 2 of them. A house with no blood and 2 graves in the desert 100 miles away. What they needed was a name, and the evidence had been pointing to one person since the very beginning. They just hadn't been looking. Detectives went back to their files from February 2010. 2 days after the missing persons report was filed, they had interviewed a man named Charles Merritt, though everyone called him Chase. He was Joseph's business partner, a welder and contractor who helped build the decorative water fountains Joseph sold through Earth-inspired products. Merritt had been the last known person to have contact with Joseph. At 8:28 on the evening of February 4th, 41 minutes after a vehicle was captured leaving the McStay driveway on a neighbor's security camera, Joseph's cell phone placed a call to Merritt. It went to voicemail. Merritt told police he had been watching a movie and ignored it. In that first interview, detectives noticed something. When Merritt spoke about Joseph, he used the past tense. Joseph was one of my best friends, he said. Was. 2 days after the family had been reported missing, when everyone else was still hoping they were alive somewhere in Mexico, Chase Merritt had already moved Joseph into the past. Detectives noted it. They asked him again. He gave the same answer. He said he had no idea where the family had gone. He said he had passed a polygraph. He said he couldn't help. 3 years later, in 2013, after the graves were found, but before his arrest, Merritt acknowledged to reporters that he had spent more than an hour with Joseph on the afternoon of February 4th. He also began suggesting publicly that Summer had anger issues and that Joseph had been suffering from a mysterious illness. He even floated the idea of writing a book about the family. Joseph's relatives called it unfounded. His father Patrick said simply, "I truly believe she loved my son." Think about that pattern. First, he minimized his connection to Joseph. Then, when pressed, he admitted they had spent time together the day the family vanished. Then, he started pointing suspicion at the victim's wife. 3 different stories. 3 different versions of Chase Merritt. Investigators went deeper into Merritt's background. According to state records, he had a criminal history that stretched back years. Felony convictions for burglary and receiving stolen property. His most recent conviction, in 2001, involved the theft of $32,000 worth of welding and drilling equipment from a company in Monrovia, California. He had served time for it. And yet, Joseph McStay had trusted him with the welding contracts, trusted him with access to the company's QuickBooks account, trusted him with tens of thousands of dollars in loans. When an acquaintance of Merritt's was contacted by a San Diego reporter in 2013, the acquaintance said something simple but telling. "I think police should look at him," the person said, "and anyone associated with him." For 3 years, no one had. His name was Charles Chase Ray Merritt. 57 years old at the time of his arrest. A welder with felony convictions for burglary and theft, including a 2001 conviction for stealing $32,000 worth of welding equipment. He had worked alongside Joseph McStay for years. He called Joseph his best friend. Joseph had trusted him enough to give him access to the company's financial accounts, to lend him tens of thousands of dollars, to bring him into the business that was making both of them a living. But to understand what Chase Merritt did and why, you have to go back to the months before the McStays disappeared. By early 2010, Chase Merritt was drowning. Not in water, in debt. He had a gambling habit that had spiraled out of control, and it had already cost him more than he could afford to lose. He owed Joseph McStay more than $30,000, money Joseph had lent him to cover gambling losses. But Merritt kept going back to the casinos, and the debt kept growing. At the same time, something else was happening inside Earth-inspired products. Joseph had started noticing discrepancies in the company's finances, checks that didn't add up, payments to accounts he hadn't authorized. According to Dan Kavanaugh, another associate who had helped Joseph build the company from the ground up, Joseph had made a decision. He was going to fire Chase Merritt. He was going to cut him off from the business, from the accounts, from the income stream that Merritt had been quietly siphoning for months. Whether Joseph confronted Merritt directly on the afternoon of February 4th has never been established with certainty. But phone records show that the two men spoke multiple times that day. Joseph told his father he was in a hurry. He had a lunch meeting to get to. By 5:47 that evening, both Joseph and Summer ended all communications. No more calls, no more texts, nothing. What prosecutors believe happened next was reconstructed from phone records, computer data, forensic evidence, and cell tower pings, not from a confession. Merritt has never admitted to anything. According to the prosecution's case, on the evening of February 4th, Chase Merritt drove from his home in Rancho Cucamonga to the McStay residence in Fallbrook, a drive of roughly 70 miles. He brought with him a 3-pound sledgehammer. What happened inside that house, the medical examiner would piece together months later from the bones found in the desert. All 4 members of the family were beaten to death. Investigators testified that the victims showed signs of torture before death. The youngest was 3 years old. The popcorn was still on the couch. The eggs were still on the counter. Whatever happened, it happened fast, and it happened while the family was in the middle of an ordinary evening at home. Merritt then faced a problem. 4 bodies, a house full of potential evidence, and a trail that could lead directly back to him if anyone looked closely enough. The prosecution alleges that Merritt kept the bodies for approximately 2 days. On the morning of February 6th, his cell phone pinged a tower in the Victorville area, deep in the high desert of San Bernardino County, the same area where the graves would be found 3 years later. Merritt had grown up in nearby Hesperia. He had attended Apple Valley High School for 3 years. He knew these back roads. He knew which ones were rarely traveled. He knew where the ground was soft enough to dig. He chose a wash off a remote dirt road and dug 2 shallow graves. He buried Joseph and Gianni in one, Summer and Joseph Jr. in the other. The sledgehammer went in with them. Then he drove away. But he wasn't done. The killing was only the first part. What came after was calculated, step by step, day by day. On February 5th, one day after the murders, Merritt accessed Joseph McStay's QuickBooks account for Earth-inspired products. He issued 4 checks. 2 were made out to himself. 2 were made out to Metro Sheet Metal, the company where Merritt fabricated the fountains. The total exceeded $21,000. All 4 checks were backdated to February 4th, the day of the murders, to make them appear routine. Over the following days, Merritt cashed those checks and went on a gambling spree at casinos across Southern California, burning through thousands of dollars at the tables. The checks were not random. Prosecutors would later argue that Merritt had been embezzling from Earth-inspired products for months before the murders, writing unauthorized checks, skimming payments, manipulating the QuickBooks ledger to cover his tracks. Joseph had begun to notice. The discrepancies were small at first, but they were adding up. And Merritt knew that once Joseph looked closely enough, everything would unravel. The gambling, the debt, the theft. Firing Merritt wouldn't just mean losing a job. It would mean exposure. It would mean another felony. It would mean prison. So when Merritt sat down at the QuickBooks account on February 5th and issued those 4 checks, he wasn't stealing from a living man. He was looting the accounts of a man he had already killed. And he did it the very next morning, before the family had even been reported missing, before anyone knew they were gone. The backdating was deliberate. If anyone ever looked at the records, the checks would appear to have been written on February 4th, while Joseph was still alive. Just another routine business transaction. Nothing to see. On February 8th, at approximately 2:06 in the morning, more than 3 days after the family was killed, someone accessed a computer inside the McStay home. The browser history shows rapid hits to Google, to QuickBooks, to a Microsoft Office template page, to a PBS Kids dinosaur show the boys had been watching, to a Capital One page. The visits were seconds apart, as though someone was scrolling through a pull-down menu of previously visited sites, not browsing deliberately. The prosecution implied it was Merritt, returning to the house in the dead of night, checking what digital traces had been left behind on the family's computer. That same day, the McStay family's Isuzu Trooper appeared in a parking lot in San Ysidro, half a mile from the Mexican border. Someone had driven it there and left it with the keys inside and the child seats still strapped in the back. That evening, a family of 4 walked through the pedestrian gate into Mexico on camera. A family that wasn't the McStays. Whoever parked that car wanted investigators to look south. For 3 years, they did. Think about the sequence. February 4th, the murders. February 5th, the checks. February 6th, the burial in the desert. February 8th, the computer accessed at 2 a.m., the car left at the border, and a random family on camera walking into Mexico. Each step was designed to do one thing: make the McStays look like they had walked away from their lives. And for over 3 years, that is exactly what investigators believed. But there was one more step, and it was the one that ended everything. On February 9th, 2010, 5 days after the McStay family was killed, a call came into the QuickBooks customer service line at 8:06 in the morning. The caller identified himself as Joseph McStay. He said he wanted his company's entire accounting records deleted from the QuickBooks servers. Permanently. Purged. Gone. The customer service representative who took the call, a Tier 3 support consultant named Ryan Baker, found the request deeply unusual. In his years handling between 25 and 50 calls a day, he had almost never encountered a business owner who wanted to destroy their own financial records. Business owners protect their data, Baker would later testify. They don't try to erase it. The caller, Baker said, was very adamant. He wanted it removed from the system entirely. Baker followed protocol. Because the caller could not be verified as the account's master administrator, Baker sent a confirmation email to the address on file, custom@earthinspiredproducts.com, and asked the caller to respond to authorize the deletion. The response never came. Baker sent a second email, then a third. No reply. The case was closed without any changes to the account. The records survived. But Baker had logged something else during that call. the phone number the caller had provided. It was not the number on file for Joseph McStay. The number was 909-374-0102. When investigators pulled that number 4 years later, it came back to one person: Chase Merritt. A dead man's name, a living man's phone number, one call. That was the thread that connected everything. The forged checks written the day after the murders, the QuickBooks access, the gambling spree, the car driven to the border, the graves dug in the desert. And now, a phone call in which the killer pretended to be the man he had already buried, trying to erase the last digital trail that proved he had stolen from him. He had thought of almost everything. He had moved the bodies. He had planted the car. He had created a false trail to Mexico. But when he picked up the phone and gave the QuickBooks representative a number to call back, he gave his own. And that number never changed. On November 5, 2014, nearly 5 years after the murders, detectives from the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department arrested Chase Merritt at his home. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. The district attorney sought the death penalty. The trial did not begin for another 4 years. Merritt fired 5 attorneys. He asked to represent himself, telling the court it would move things faster. He told the judge he had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure and believed he had 6 to 8 months to live. He said that in 2015. The trial finally opened on January 7, 2019, in a San Bernardino courtroom. The prosecution laid out the evidence in layers: the DNA on the steering wheel and gear shift of the trooper, the cell phone pinging near Victorville on the morning of February 6th, the forged checks totaling more than $21,000 backdated to the day of the murders, the QuickBooks call on February 9th, the dead man's name, the killer's phone number, the past tense slip in the very first interview, and the motive: a man buried in gambling debt, about to be fired by the only person still keeping him afloat, who chose to kill an entire family rather than lose his seat at the table. Merritt's defense team fought back from multiple angles. They pointed to Dan Kavanaugh as an alternate suspect, arguing he had motive and access. The prosecution countered with a single fact: Kavanaugh had been in Hawaii when the family disappeared. The defense challenged the cell tower evidence, arguing that a brief ping near Victorville was ambiguous. They hired forensic experts who questioned the vehicle comparison from the neighbor's security camera. A specialist testified he could not eliminate Merritt's truck as the vehicle on camera, but could not confirm it either. They noted that no blood was ever found in Merritt's truck. They emphasized that the Fallbrook house showed no physical evidence of a quadruple murder: no blood, no DNA, no weapon marks. They asked the jury to consider how 4 people could be killed in a home without leaving a single trace. The jury deliberated. On June 10, 2019, they returned their verdict: guilty. All 4 counts. First-degree murder with special circumstances. 2 weeks later, the same jury recommended the sentence: death. On January 21, 2020, the court upheld the recommendation. Charles Chase Ray Merritt was sentenced to death for the murders of Joseph McStay, Summer McStay, 4-year-old Gianni McStay, and 3-year-old Joseph McStay Jr. At his sentencing, Merritt said nothing. He has never confessed. He maintains his innocence to this day. He is currently incarcerated at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego, where he is preparing a habeas corpus petition. California has maintained a moratorium on the death penalty since 2019. Merritt is not eligible for parole. He will likely die in prison, whether by execution or by time. The phone call that was meant to erase everything, the one placed on February 9th, 5 days after a family of 4 was beaten to death in their own home, became the single thread that stitched the entire case together. A name that belonged to a dead man. A number that belonged to his killer. One moment of carelessness in an otherwise methodical cover-up. That was enough. Joseph McStay had built a business from nothing. He made fountains, water features designed to bring calm into people's homes. His company was thriving. He had a wife who loved him, 2 young sons, and a house in a town called the Friendly Village. On the evening of February 4th, 2010, 2 small bowls of popcorn sat on the couch. The boys had been watching something on television. By morning, the popcorn was still there. The family was not. 4 lives, including 2 children who never made it to kindergarten, ended so that one man could sit at a casino table for a few more hours. $21,000 in forged checks. That was the price. Not for a fortune, not for freedom, for a few more hands at the table. That is the question this case leaves behind, and it's one worth sitting with. What does it say about a person when the value of 4 lives is less than the next bet? If you know someone who should hear this story, share this video. And if you think you would have caught what investigators missed for 3 years, there's another case waiting. A detail everyone overlooked. A truth hiding in plain sight. It's right here.